So I'm really glad we could put this together. There's a lot to talk about. I was very encouraged by that meeting that you all had here and everything, but there are antenna up, but we want to keep, what was it, Mr. Reagan, you said trust but verify the reality and so forth, but we'll talk about that, and it's really glad we could put this together.
Great to be with you today, Harold.
Always good to see you, and welcome very much to Conversations. A pleasure. Welcome to the program. Dan Coughlin. Dan Coughlin's the executive director here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and we're going to be talking with him about matters of communication, particularly as it relates to public access and the public's access to communication in terms of the current situation, for a little of the historical and particularly the future. And Dan, welcome really very much to Conversations. Always good to see you.
Great to see you, Harold.
Share just a little bit of your own background, if you have personal background. You were involved in Pacifica and that sort of thing, and then we'll get into a discussion of the current status of public access cable television and the public's access to communications to begin to look ahead. But could you share a little of your own background,
sure.
please?
I come from a more of a journalistic background, editorial background, and worked in a lot of different places, and mostly here in New York, in the Caribbean. Worked for a wire service called Interpress Service, Third World News Agency,
Yes.
a nonprofit independent press organization that sought to provide independent news, news independent of the big media giants that dominate the wire services, AP and Reuters principally, which are old, larger, one is US-based, AP, and the other British-based. And Interpress Service sought to challenge the hegemony of the two large European and American wire services. And from there I went to Pacifica Radio.
Did you ever feel like Daniel and Goliath in that kind of a thing?
It was a very big thing because they, Interpress began in the 60s.
Right.
And kind of rode the wave of the post-colonial period where a lot of new countries were coming in, especially in Africa and Asia. You had the non-aligned movement, and there was real efforts to challenge the bias of British and American and other news agencies of old colonial powers.
Right, the Agent regime,
that's
one
right.
might call it in modern terms.
Exactly,
Yeah,
and so, I mean, it could be something as simple as a cup of coffee. You know, typically the AP might say, bad news, folks, coffee is going to cost more money, but if you're from Kenya, you know, that may not
be good news.
That could be good news. So,
right.
So even that bias, you know, simple biases in day-to-day reporting was challenged by a lot of different groups all across the world, and it crystallized, if you remember, in the New World Information Order and UNESCO in the late 70s. Yeah. And Interpress Service.
Dudu Dien, did you know Dien? He was.
Yes, that's right, from Tunisia, I believe. And so the New World Information Order grew in power, but eventually it was red-baited by the Reagan administration in the early 80s. They called it a communist front. Interpress Service.
So much of the ire has been directed at the commie.
Yeah. And
there are other people that they could direct their ire at if they were really thinking that might be more threatening than the commies, and particularly now, right?
Indeed. But at any rate, Interpress kind of got hit with that attack, and but it's still around and doing quite well. But again, focused on news from the global south, from the third world.
That's a huge issue in terms of the world, the status of the historically inherited institutions so favor those who are favored. And there's so many within the world order that are not well served by the established order, and there is a dialectic there that really has to be addressed by people of conscience or concern, seems to me.
And you have to, you know, lift yourself out of the box.
Right.
And you have to, you know, look at issues or events from a different perspective. If you live in Africa or Latin America or the Caribbean, you know, your worldview is completely different, and therefore the media institutions which reflect that have to reflect that point of view. And I think some of the huge issues facing the mass media today is that's not happening because the global information system is dominated by a small handful of corporations and companies who don't share the vast majority's point of view or day-to-day experiences, and
right.
so it's very skewed.
That point of view and experience is not really adaptable to the business model,
right?
In many cases,
and that's why public access is so important,
right?
Too. Exactly the same.
Public
dynamic.
access came out of in the 70s when cable came. There's channel capacity. You could have something set aside for the people, and I guess Pacifica came out of the same, or the Pacifica Network out
Very
of San
similar
Francisco
philosophy.
on radio, by and large, right?
Very similar philosophy. Very much oriented in the 40s. This came out of more of the pacifist movement, out of the Bay Area, out of the CO camps, the conscientious objector camps of World War II. A lot of people, a lot of pacifists opposed the war.
Right.
But also they wanted to give primacy to a diversity of views.
Yeah.
Not just one single party line or two-party line, but no, a real diversity of views and a richness of views as an essential character of any society, but in particular a democratic society.
Yeah, particularly as we're emerging where we had more and more capacity for that, it made it possible for there to be many, many voices. Mao said let 1 million voices ring. It could be we're going to let 6 billion voices ring, because the technology is moving so quickly now in terms of liberating, democratizing access and capability for people to communicate that previously have been sort of locked out by the established system, right?
Yes, that's true. But those distribution networks are still monopolized and controlled by the very few.
Yes, I've noticed, So, as is everything else, it would seem. And that premise might well be questioned, and it is by BAI, and it's questioned by a lot of the people here, although I think public access is open to the public, so it's open to anyone, so anyone can come in and talk about things. And you enjoy it here at Manhattan. I was just saying to you, and I'm being unbiased, and so I think Manhattan Neighborhood Network is one of the best institutions ever created in the history of the universe that we live in, or something.
Yeah,
and the movement we are part of. That's the thing that people should be aware of.
It's amazing. I mean, we are definitely part of not only just a movement here in New York City, but around the country and around the world.
The world increasingly,
And Manhattan Neighborhood Network in particular, you can just come by here on a Saturday, and there's an extraordinary array of things happening, of different groups from all across the city, all across the world here, using the facility, doing amazing programming, a variety show or a camera training, and the staff are fantastic, helping out, and it is a remarkable institution.
It's worked out really well here. Some places we're part of a larger movement around the country. I'm not sure how many of these public access facilities there are around the country, a couple thousand maybe, or
about
something.
3,000.
Some of them mom and pop, some of them not. And then there's questions of relating and getting effective resource to be able to build this alternative medium that is open to the public, as it were.
Yeah, I think one of the keys to...
The people, rather than just the pros.
That's one of the keys to public access, why it's so important. I think another critical one is its local character. Where you get a chance to have local community groups, local people access the media, and that's so important, especially in an age of consolidation. We remember... I mean, this came out really clearly with this situation just a few years ago in Minot, North Dakota, where an ammonia train derailed, and the local police went to the local radio stations to try to alert people to the damage. Right, exactly. They were all owned, 6 of the local radio stations were owned by Clear Channel.
And they're playing Montevandi or something.
And they're programmed from a central programming zone in San Diego, so there was no way...
Even lousy music often.
...that you could alert the local town residents to the
reality of the ammonia train.
But even then, that's... The localism, I think, is not just one essential character, but there's another really important point about media, which is that even with local media, the commercial nature of that media often prevents a diversity of views. So you have to be both local and non-commercial. One example.
Now that's a great combination if it can work. And it seems to have been able to work pretty well in this realm of public access cable television and public access television. I mean, there's a blending of that with the internet and things that are going on now. It's very hopeful in many, if you see it in a certain way. There's a great deal of democracy seen by the advance of telecommunications, that sort of thing. It's a hopeful era. At the same time, you want to keep an eye on the people that have, different business models and so forth. But it's a pretty hopeful time, don't you think?
Yeah, I think there is a real, a tremendous support for independent, local, non-commercial media.
Seems to be here in New
States.
York, if I'm not
Absolutely,
The city
New
council has been a big hand,
For Manhattan Neighborhood Network, it has, because what has been happening, as you know,
Yes,
Harold,
please.
is there's been a kind of an attempt to federalize, if you will, or nationalize with all of cable policy in fewer and fewer hands, a concentration of ownership and of determining the policies. And there was an attempt at passing federal legislation that would take away the local accountability of public access.
We were very aware of that and helped launch a campaign that seems to have had some effect.
Massive nationwide campaign. I think many viewers might know it more around the battle around net neutrality, but it was about taking away local accountability over the city streets and placing that accountability in Washington so that big companies could not have to negotiate or not be accountable to local municipalities.
Yeah, that seems to be that question. They do have, as we look ahead now, they're going to be accountable even through our city council and that sort of thing, and local thing. And that's an important question in terms of vouchsafing public access as an institution.
Yeah, and it's important for media. I gave the example of the Minot, North Dakota case of ammonia, and for emergency reasons, we can all understand that. You have to have local access. It's important for things like traffic, you know, or weather. But it's also really important for a city like New York, where, for instance, you have, 150 different languages spoken in New York City public schools?
I think it's more than that,
or whatever, 164?
I heard we got 192 nations in the UN. We got sizable communities of 189 of them in the New York City area. I mean, it's great and everything.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you have to have media that reflects the local character and issues that are happening that affect people in their day-to-day lives.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily fit with the profit motive, where a Clear Channel or a Time Warner or a Comcast or a Verizon, they want to have a national one-size-fits-all approach because it's easier than for them for profitability. And the local character is then wiped out and lost. That really affects local communities all across the country in so many different ways, whether it's Minot, North Dakota, or the 189 languages here spoken in New York City. That richness and diversity is lost.
Yeah, that's right. And you have this, and we've had Ben Bagdicki, and he used to say there was 55 major channels of a community company, down to about 5 or 6 now or something, that controls 85% of what the people of the United States of America see, hear, and read, and that kind of thing. And that is not right, or that's not appropriate in terms of if one favors, in a certain sense, a democratic order where, everybody in a certain sense matters.
Yeah, because you now have, 50, I think the other phrase is 55 channels and nothing is on.
Thank you, Mr. Springsteen.
So,
57, I think it was.
The
57, it wasn't a mere 55, Dan, it was 57. So you see, there was diversity.
But, so you get, and it's just so much the same lowest common denominator that comes out, and what you lose in that process, obviously, especially if it's a local and nonprofit character, is that richness of diversity that you get with MNN, that you get with a lot of community radio or community television stations, or even local newspapers, which are also facing those same economic challenges.
And the independent media movement in general, and then that's tied into a world independent media. And so it's a really interesting thing. What has made it possible for public access to be able to function the way they do? They have a business model or a thing set up where they're able to provide all of these facilities, as they do, to the citizens of Manhattan, and it is all free of charge, which is a good price in any currency, so that anyone who comes here does not have to be looking out to make the nut in order to get the business plan, that sort of thing. They can come here just to be. What's made it possible? It is that we have a relationship with the cable companies, that there's some public service, some public payback, as it were, negotiated through an agency that gives some stream of income to make that possible as an intervening agency between the folks, so that they can produce it without being involved in the marketplace considerations that a pro has to be and that sort of thing. Maybe you could just talk to that and the importance of that.
Well, it's actually not so much a telecommunications or media issue, ironically. It's an issue to do with land.
Yeah, okay.
So land use, it's like an oil well or the Central Park or your concession on a city street, the hot dog stand, because what is happening is the Time Warner or the telecommunications company, the cable company is digging up the city streets.
Yeah, that's one argument,
and laying their cable. And because of that, they have to negotiate with the local city, and they have to pay for the use of the public property. That's public property.
And also the inconvenience of that.
The inconvenience, you know, everything from paving the streets to making sure it's safe, that the wires are not exposed, that the boxes are located in a safe place.
Thank God there is that regulatory aspect to this, right? Thank goodness there is that.
It's critically important. Here in New York City, you know, you might have a telecom box in the street. There's city ordinances that says if there's graffiti on it for more than 20 days, it has to be cleaned.
Interesting.
You know, so all kinds of things you don't even think about are really important, because the reason is because the accountability for the city streets relies with the city officials.
In our case, the mayor's office.
That's right.
Do it, right?
That's right. So if you have a problem with your city street, or you know, you call the city, or they can be held accountable for the management of the highways, of the streets, of the public rights of way. So the issue of Time Warner or of cable is really an issue over public land use.
Okay.
And the cable companies and the telecommunications company obviously want to pay as little as possible and make as much money as possible.
And they do.
And they do.
I think it might be worth mentioning that there's also that fact that it's not only the inconvenience of tearing up the streets, it also is an access to a very lucrative market in any place where the cable is able to go, and that's something that's maybe worth taking some cognizance of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's extremely lucrative. It is like an oil gusher.
Beaver Books printing press was a license to print money, right?
That's what it's like. And I know, you know, you pick up the newspapers filled with articles about Gulf of Mexico oil drilling and gas drilling, and how the oil companies aren't paying their fair share of royalties to the public coffers for use of that public land for private property. Same thing, mining, forestry, so many different parts of the use of the public lands in the United States and around the world is a situation of lack of fairness for local communities. And the same thing is true here in New York City. Time Warner cable in New York City alone, out of New York City, generates $1.2 billion a year in revenue.
Wait a minute, that's with a B?
Billion, yes.
$1.2 billion is realized by the Time Warner company by having access to the New York City market? Is that correct?
It's much more than that, actually, but that's just for their video service.
That's their video?
That's what they generate in revenue from the video service, apart from their telephone service and their internet service.
And the internet service,
excluding those, just from their video, just from what you see on your cable television.
So that cable into the home is a source of tremendous revenue for the company. And while we're talking about tearing up the streets, and that's interesting, that's a public thing, but that's an access to a market. So it's not only to the access to the raw materials that you were saying in some country, it's access to the market, which is really important to any company, and we should ought to keep that in mind, that that's an awfully large figure. You're probably too young to remember the Ev and Charlie show. Eb Dirksen was a House of Representatives back in the 50s. He was a House of Representatives, and there was another fellow, and they had the Ev and Charlie show, and Eb Dirksen, he was sort of like Douglas. He would talk, and he said, you know, when we're looking at the federal budget, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, it finally adds up to real money, you know. And in a sense, that's the thing that's worth keeping in mind, that's a relationship that I think probably a lot of people would find interesting. So they're able to negotiate a certain payment fee out of from the cable company. Well, I don't know what it is, if you happen to know, 30, 40 cents a month or something. Or whatever.
It's 5% of that revenue they have to give back to the city, plus they have to support public and educational channels here and government access channels here in the city. But that's minimal. I mean, it's
How
a
much,
minimal.
I don't want to interrupt you, but how much of that would be relating to, let's say, public access television that we're talking about?
They provided about less than 0.5% of that 1.2 billion went to public access. About 5.5 million out of the 1.2 billion was provided to public access in the 5 boroughs of New York City.
In the 5 boroughs, that's for the 5 boroughs. 0.5%,
Less
right?
than that, yeah.
Less than that, and then there are other things that they negotiate for within that, with that 5. So do we have any figures, if we may, any figures on the national average? What happens in Pocatello, Idaho? What happens in Portland, Oregon, that kind of thing, or Massachusetts or anything?
Yeah, it depends on the municipality.
Okay.
In some cases, some cities get very little, but in many cases, interestingly enough, Harold, in some cities, public access centers, public educational government access centers are getting maybe 2, 3, 3.5, 4, even up to 4.5% in some municipalities.
That's interesting. It would be good to bring up, wouldn't it? Maybe?
Yes,
Yeah.
and in fact, in the Washington, in legislation in Washington, which has since died, the baseline, the minimum amount that was being required of cable companies to pay for public access was 1% of gross revenue. So that was the minimum amount.
Minimum, yeah.
Here in New York City,
1/2 of
it's
1?
less than 1/2 of 1%. So
We have some other people to call attention to when we come into that negotiating process, it would seem to me.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And not only is it not fair what is happening in New York City, I think, compared to other cities,
Yeah.
but New York City is so unique
Absolutely.
in terms of its own character, its own historic role in media, in communications, in film, in television. I think we know that really this is such an integral part of the city and the future of the city that there ought to be much more commitment by the city and certainly by the cable companies to supporting free speech and community media.
Free speech?
Certainly when you see the level of extraordinary windfall profits that is being generated through public property, through access to the public streets.
Right.
You know, it's just it's not fair. And some would even say it's obscene. You know, the level of profitability, while our families don't, you know, have access to pre-K.
Yeah, right.
Or you know, you see all the issues around.
We got programs here that serve that, and people that put people that are in you know gospel programs that go to people that are in house and everything. It gets to them. It really is serving.
Yeah,
and
so you
it's
have
being done
groups
here.
like M&N, you know, on shoestring budgets, you know, responding to those needs because the big guys aren't paying their fair share.
No, because they all have it geared up to the marketplace and that sort of thing. And a lot of these things are not things that would serve in the marketplace. It wouldn't serve a business model marketplace thing, but it serves the public very well because it deals with what the people really want. That's called democracy, I think.
Yeah.
That's the word for that sort of thing, a democratic order and anything. And there are a lot of people who just see that. They would say, well, if you want to do it, why don't you go out and, you know, they said, go out and hire, go out and, what was it, Mr. who was the fellow from Arizona, who won the election, and he said, go out and inherit a department store. I mean, if you know, you'd have that we could do that. They got that bias and everything. But it's a thing. Now, there have been these threats to this public access. For one thing, we should make it available to people, understand that this is open to anybody in Manhattan to come here and say, I want to be a producer. They have the equipment here, if I'm not mistaken, that is very comparable to what is used within the networks. Somebody said the microphones that we use here is the same microphone that Mr. Bush uses when he puts his national address. I mean, and they've got editing systems that democratically are making available to them the same technology that the fellows in the network or the men and women in the network have. So, and it's all made available to any citizen or group here in Manhattan for free. Now you've got to think that doesn't mean you don't have to get you don't have to make a nut. You know, you don't have to meet your investment cost or something like that. If you're in that, that's a different kind of context for creating media than one where it's all done in a business model and so forth. And that's an important distinction in terms of the way a society ought to be organized?
Yeah, I think it's really so critical,
Yeah.
and it's so important for a healthy society.
I do too.
You
yeah.
see things like sectarian conflict,
Yeah, right.
for instance,
Considerable.
where people are treated separately,
Yeah.
or you get something based upon your religion or ethnicity or or national origin, perhaps.
Redlining.
Redlining,
yeah.
etc.
Mm-hmm.
This MNN stands completely against sectarianism, if you will, you
right.
know, which is a real problem in the planet today.
Yeah. It's a great model for the world.
And it's about equality. It's about treating everybody fairly and getting everybody access to the same equipment that's under the same conditions.
And
so it's a beautiful model.
And it seems, in a certain sense, if I may, in the technological evolution of things, it seems to be there are things going on because the equipment keeps getting. Do you remember the old days when you had to get a 100-pound thing to carry it to make the program? Now it's down. It's getting smaller. It's getting more and more better. The technology is evolving. We got these systems that you can do editing on your. We got YouTube now. We got all kinds of things that are bringing capability and technology to a level where it's getting down to the people that a real revolution in communication might be in the offing here as we sit and talk in November of 2006.
I think the word revolution is absolutely appropriate, and it's reminiscent of the invention of movable type. And Mr. Gutenberg, you know, in the late 15th century, where just that act of the movable type, you know, allowed Luther, you know, to put the 12 Theses up on the door of Wittenberg Church.
That's right.
The Roman Church responded with huge tomes 10 years later, and it was over. Luther won the struggle, and you know, it's history. Reformation happened, and so movable type created a whole worldwide revolution. And I think in a similar way, you know, what is happening with new digital technologies, whatever their impetus and whatever their intent or motivation, is creating this tremendous opportunity, I think, for people all over the world to communicate as never before. And that's why public access what can happen here now can have much more of an impact than ever before, because you're now not just a local community media center,
that's right,
but it's really a global community of local programming.
That's nice.
You see, it's a global community of local voices, of local programming, which is a tremendous transformation.
And those locals can those locals can communicate one with the other and create information over. You have information over. They can create patterns of recognition between them. They're interest groups that can be seen on a global scale now and can reach out with those local understandings. So. Think locally and act globally, or think globally and act locally, or think globally and act globally. It's a communication thing that's going. We've been in the access has been a phenomenon of cable. It couldn't happen, it seemed to me, in the networks the way they were. There was a technological evolving. Cable is there. It had an increased channel capacity, made that available. But we are, and maybe it's worth talking about that for a couple of minutes, because there have been, within that cable realm, public access cable television, there have been the threats to the basis by which these cable access facilities around the country, and as you say, around Europe and around the world now, were being challenged by some of the big players and so forth who wanted to set a different thing. What's the status of all that? We've been doing a great deal of attention with the Save Access thing, looking at the COPE bill, looking at the Net Neutrality you mentioned before. That's a very important issue that get into digital. But what's the status of that threat, and what is the attitude we here ought to have, and also the concerned citizenry ought to have as far as the future development of communications policy in this country and the world?
Well, it's something that you have to be vigilant about.
Thank you, Mr. Reagan.
The main you know, the large corporations, they're continuing to push, they're continuing to concentrate ownership, they're in a ruthless, in a way, search for ever expanding markets and higher profits.
Right. Down to about 5 or 6 now?
You know, it always seems to be getting smaller and smaller, but yes, I think there's about half a dozen extremely large media companies, one of the largest of which is Time Warner. Based right here in New York City. Fox Corporation, I think folks know, with Rupert Murdoch, and all with, you know, very political agendas. But at any rate, they moved into Washington, D.C. recently with the telephone companies trying to pass this legislation to take away local control, local accountability, local democracy.
And with all that money, they were realizing they had very large coffers and very large and deep pockets
they
to talk to
spent
congressmen and
it was
whatnot,
interesting,
right?
you know.
It was interesting.
Yeah,
it was David and Goliath.
It was David and Goliath,
Yeah.
but it played into the last election because you saw in microcosm the main big companies, the main lobbyists spent about $100 million to get this legislation passed, and it did not happen.
Right, there was a grassroots, was it not?
That's right, it was grassroots.
Yeah,
but from
wonderful.
the company's perspective, they spent $100 million and they didn't get what they want.
Right.
So they called it a do-nothing Congress, right? So it was a blockage of the arteries there. But yes, it was because of a grassroots movement that stopped it. And now those companies are going like water in search of, you know, another outlet, are going to state capitals all across the country to try to get more sympathetic legislation passed by the state capitals. And so we anticipate that
keep your eye on Albany. Huh?
Big phone, big cable will go to Albany here in New York in the very near future to try to again, remove that local accountability, the local city council, the local diversity.
Or any responsibility to the local community.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that level of accountability they're trying to wipe out. But of course, those who believe in democracy and in fairness and in
yes, there are a few.
There's still a few.
A couple left, right?
You know, think this is outrageous because they will be able to use public rights of way in pursuit of private profit, enormous profit.
With no payback to the community at all.
Very little.
Seems like a bad deal for the folks in that case and
Extremely.
everything. And there's a large constituency in this thing. I can remember a year or so ago when Michael Powell was trying to favor mergers and acquisitions at the federal, and there was a huge uprising. They didn't know. The emails came in the millions, and they had to back off.
That's exactly
similar
what
to
happened.
this, then, right?
Exactly what happened.
And it's in protecting of the cable access, Save Access Cable Act. We think of cable, right?
Yeah.
So that's there, but we have to keep an eye on it, right?
Yeah, because it's not just, remember, it just wasn't the free speech advocates, but it's also, for instance, civil rights organizations.
Okay, right.
Because the big phone companies and the big cable companies have wanted to redline neighborhoods, just like they do with banks.
It's like gentrification, right?
Yeah. Just go for the rich neighborhoods, just provide services to the wealthy, and not to even working class, middle class neighborhoods. Don't want to do it. So with local accountability, you say, no, you have to serve everybody equally. Harlem is treated just like the Upper East Side.
Right.
And so here in Manhattan, the whole cable network is built out to all neighborhoods.
Yeah, right.
And that's because the city, with community groups, forced that to happen. So that level of equality exists for everybody, no matter what.
Okay.
But the big telecommunications companies want to pick and choose, want to cherry pick. And now they'll go to the state houses to try to cherry pick, to try to not pay for public access or not pay for the use of the public rights of way.
Right.
And that's going to be, you know, that will be a tough fight again.
Seems to me that'll be something that will be very politically interesting, too, because you've got people who are going to keep an eye on that process. There are those of us within the thing. We got Betty Yu here, and people are keeping track of these things, and others in the Tony Riddle is down the Alliance for Community Media in Washington. They're keeping track of it, and keep your eye on where that many-headed Hydra heads itself in the, you know, to Albany or to, you know, whatever.
And there will be a lot of people, because it's not just the civil rights groups, it's not just the media groups like us, it's also consumer groups. Because once you have the companies getting their way, your prices are going to go up. Cable rates are going to go up even higher. You're going to get less, you know, less service. Right now, you have a problem with service, cable service.
They wanted you to call the FCC, right?
Yeah.
At one point, they didn't call the FCC.
But we can call 311. I just had a problem with the
Okay.
bill on my bill. I called 311. And you can get some level of local accountability. That is important. So consumer groups are concerned about this.
Yeah, and that all translates into political power.
Yeah.
At one level. I mean, even up to and including presidential, congressional, and Senate races.
And local municipalities are
and
upset.
local municipalities.
City of New York doesn't like that.
I'm here to say I think the City Council of New York is very, very favorable towards this idea of having something to serve the people, don't you think?
The City Council has been fantastic. We've had great support. The chair of the Land Use Committee, Melinda Katz from Queens.
Good.
Tony Avella from Queens has been fantastic. The chair of the city council, the speaker of the city council, Christine Quinn, our local
Yeah.
council member, Gail Brewer.
Yeah, she led it
Our
there.
council members all in Manhattan have
Yeah.
been fantastic.
And is that
extremely
characteristic
supportive.
around the country? Do you have it, or
Yes.
are we? Yeah, okay.
I think so.
We're there. Okay, that's encouraging for the nation. Yeah.
One interesting point is that I think Media Access Project a few years ago did an analysis of Portland, Chicago, and Minneapolis local news coverage in the month up to a local an election, and less than 1% of the election coverage of their news coverage in the month run up to the election was on local elections.
Yeah.
Less than 1% of the airtime.
Yeah.
So what is being killed here is the oxygen for democracy to survive.
Thank you.
When
That's
you
a
have
good, yeah.
when you have such concentration of ownership, they don't cover city council
No,
races.
they only want to cover
They don't
the-
cover assembly and senate and state races.
Cover the big wigs at the
That's
Versailles
it.
Palace. Yeah.
That's right. Just
Yeah.
a few people at the Versailles
Yeah,
Palace.
because
it's just
those
the
are the only
courtiers.
few, those are the only few that are really being served by the market that's in place and everything like that.
Right.
And you know,
So the city council gets no airtime. The local democracy is what is being killed. That's what happens here, because it's all huge global corporations who don't care about the local city council in New York City or
just-
in Ames, Iowa.
as long as those suckers will send their money, that's all.
right.
The
That's all they
profits,
care.
Yeah.
But
I
we
mean,
care about
yes,
democracy.
we do care about.
Yeah, we care about what happens with
Yeah.
our schools. We care what happens with the
Absolutely,
hospitals.
yeah.
We care what happens with our city streets,
Yeah.
and we want to have some influence
And
over that.
that's a metaphor for the human condition in a certain sense, because that's an issue that's writ large. Because the system in place really serves only what, maybe at the best the upper 20% or so in a real ongoing way, and the mass of the people, the system, there's some questions that have to come into account. You said the oxygen. You used the thing oxygen. I use the term often here, and I find it's true that a human organism has 100 trillion cells. Did you realize that? Not the life cycle. A human 100 trillion cells, and they're all overlaid
How
with
many
DNA.
zeros is that?
I don't know, about 100 trillion cells, and a lot of them in the gut and stuff, but they're all overlaid with DNA. They make a system, and each cell has to have oxygen to be functioning.
Wow.
You have to, a metaphor of that, and that you got to have oxygen. You use the term oxygen for the people. Information. It's important that we get a system where everybody is served. We can move to where everybody in the world is served. There's so many people that are ill-served and so forth and that sort of thing. One of the problems is there's not enough time to talk about the many things. We're talking about cable, good, let's keep an eye on them, and there are people that will at state level, that sort of thing, but it looks fairly good on that level. You mentioned net neutrality. That begins to get over into the net and into the, the transition that a lot of people see, everything's moving toward the internet and that sort of thing. Does that look like that's been moving in the right direction, or what's the status of that?
Yeah, thus far right now, that the attempt by cable companies and big phone companies to essentially put toll booths, on the internet to charge for extra, not just your regular $30 or $50 a month or 10 or whatever it is that you pay, but on top of that, charge you extra for a premium service, a gold service, a platinum service, whatever it might be.
And if you don't have that, you can get a little
you're
path you can walk
again,
along on the side. Yeah.
creating different classes of citizens, and based on your ability to pay.
Yes, right.
And so again, the damage that would do to the society, where at least we have. I mean, you do have to pay to get on the internet, but once you get on, or you could go to the local library, you don't have to pay for certain, to get Google or whatever it is. So that is a very damaging proposition, and though thus far that has been stopped as well. So that's good news.
We want to keep an eye on that also, because it's a many-headed hydra.
Many heads to that hydra.
And it was Mr. Reagan who said, trust but verify. The
Absolutely.
market forces that seem to be. But at a certain sense, as we come up the holiday season here in 2006, there's reason for us in access or in the democratic movement and so forth to be somewhat pleased with the direction and the emerging of things. There's some things that we can celebrate as we keep an active eye on those that are trying to get around what's going on.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah,
because of this movement that exists in the country, a grassroots movement with a lot of different support from all kinds of different organizations. So it's been very powerful, big mobilization this past year. I think sitting here a year ago, Harold, you would have been extremely pessimistic.
Absolutely.
And people were worried about the very future of M&N and public access. I think we can say a year later, thanks to the incredible mobilization around the country, certainly the future does appear, at least for now, while remaining vigilant.
That's right, but
for M&N, I think we're quietly confident that not only can we hold on to M&N,
we might even make some gains.
We might make some gains. We can strengthen and build it.
Right. That's really good. That's really good if we're into the area of communicating ideas, and also we got some ideas about improving the human condition, all that sort of thing. It's really good. Now, if we could, that's very good. Happy New Year, happy holidays, but trust and verify. Anyway, the thing is now we mentioned the net neutrality. Everything's moving digital, it would seem. We're coming out of an analog basis background for multimedia and so forth. Everything's moving toward the internet now. The programs at M&N are not only aired on the cable system here, but they're also streamed to the internet. We have tutorials here. We have the best editing systems that are available to the people who come here and that sort of thing. It's coming down to the desktop of people around the country, the editing, Final Cut, that kind of thing that allows them to do it. There's a revolution going on, and everything is moving to the internet. And are we also moving to the internet, the public access movement, as it were? And how does it relate? What's the relationship between what's come out of a traditional cable world that we've come out of, some of the advantages of having a relationship to companies that give an alternative way of setting up the financing of all of that can maybe avoid the less advantaged things of that business model that people have to do if they're in the the cutthroat world of business competition and so forth. But we have that thing, an intervening agency between the people and the technology and the capability of producing and distributing product. But it's all moving to the internet now. And maybe we could talk about some of those the dimensions of that transformation that seems important. We now have YouTube, we can archive tapes, and what does that mean as we begin to look ahead, particularly since you're coming up to franchising here in a year or so? And what's the future outlook for communications that takes into account that things are going to be moving into the internet?
Yeah, I think certainly you mentioned one aspect, an analog facility, like we are still largely analog, but that this facility has to go digital.
And this is a mass movement
happening all around the country.
The zeitgeist requires.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are great advantages to that, and we should understand it and move with the zeitgeist rather than fight it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For all of us. I mean, you mentioned YouTube. You can see how you can. There are certain real benefits for those of us who are trying to get the word out on different issues. Something like YouTube is really extremely helpful.
That's for archiving, but just remember, again, I don't know if people pick up on the fact that the programs here now are streamed very dependably and can be seen. The programs here can be seen everywhere in the world. They can be seen in Antarctica with the penguins.
And they are.
Or they can be seen in Australia. They are. I got a friend watches in Moscow regularly, the program coming out of here. Now, that's a revolution of capability that's coming from the digital revolution that's going on, which probably goes back to the design of integrated chips and all sorts of things that have certain imperatives to what's going to be able to be allowed that hasn't been allowed coming out of history. Right?
And that's loosely referred to what we loosely call, having a multi-platform approach.
Okay.
Where you're not only just thinking, and it doesn't matter whether you're in print media, you used to have the print media, you used to have the video media, you used to have all these distinctions, but now all of those are coming together.
Right.
Because what's happening is you're broadcasting not just on a cable cast, but you're on your cell phone, you're on your iPod, you're on the internet, you're on multiple platforms. So I think the transition, certainly for public access, for this facility, is a simple transition from an analog one platform system, local cable to 600,000 households in Manhattan, to a multi-platform community media center that is distributing content onto multiple different forms.
Including connection back to those some people are going to be able to jump on the digital bandwagon easier than others because they'll be able to get their high-def television and all that and their thing So it's like a train. Some people are in first class in terms of this digital thing. There are going to be people lagging. We talked about not redlining. So we want to keep liaison to the people that are still caught, let's say by economics perhaps or something, in the analog world. We want to keep touch with that because we're serving a mass thing.
Absolutely.
You understand what I'm saying? It's like you got to leave some of the things there.
We'll
you know what I'm
keep
saying?
the fax machine and the email.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So yeah.
Well, it's a challenge.
Yes,
yeah.
because a lot of people are still on. I'm still on a fax machine. Many of us are still on fax machines.
Yeah.
Even though you have the internet and the email. So
I still can't figure out how to make half of the. It seems my whole life is just trying to figure out how to make a digital gadget work. But I'm sorry, I'm just my prejudice. But anyway.
But that's the challenge. You've got to both be working with a lot of the traditional or legacy systems.
Yeah, that's
as
good.
Well as the as well as the new ones.
Yeah, and the younger are more adept at the youth. I mean, they're more adept at the thing coming along. It seems to me everybody young knows how to play a computer like Vladimir Horowitz plays the piano.
Yeah,
I mean, it's very encouraging.
It's all feel, isn't it now?
Yeah,
it's, the touch, the hot touch, the video camera, the iPod, the digital camera. Wherever you go now, you see everybody's onto that. So.
Yeah, and it seems to me like the youth are picking up on that, and that we're coming into, like you were talking about the printing press and everything. McLuhan talked about how the metaphor for Western civilization was a phonetic alphabet, and we're moving now into where we're having multimedia. We're in cable television. We're in multimedia is cable. So we're moving into a multimedia world where the revolution in terms of the ability to have information that can be digitally manipulated and utilized is moving almost even beyond Moore's law. It's going, and the things that we can see just over the horizon, we seem to have a gusher or a Niagara of capacity that is promised at the level of design, of a basic computer design and the technology that's coming. It's like we're on the other side of the chessboard, and every time you're doubling it now, you're doubling every time you move from one thing to the other, so that it looks like it's inexorable that there's going to be more and more bandwidth and capability coming out of the design labs, and that's what's setting the template for what's going to be possible within the wider world in a sense. And there's some pretty interesting things that are harbored. It can be harbored. You can see in a future terms of where we're moving collectively as a human society, don't you think?
Yeah, and it impacts. I mean, I'm saying what everybody I think already is experiencing. Many people, it's impacting our day-to-day lives.
Right.
And I think the trick, though, is to make sure that information revolution is something that is about empowering individuals
Absolutely.
and empowering communities, and not, again, for the private profit of very few.
Right.
Because, yes, we are bombarded every day with images and information and communications, but so much of that is, going back to our original discussion, it's aimed at selling something, buying something, that we are the commodities. We as the viewers are commodities. That's what's being bought and sold.
Right. Eyeballs, they say.
Eyeballs, right? They even say eyeballs, right? So, but here with a different mission at public access.
Yeah, prefer
in community media, we're not interested in selling anything.
Okay, now that's
we're not interested in we're interested in moving and working with and empowering local voices and local communities.
That's right. It's like fellas jamming. You ever jam? I had a friend of mine who used to have a loft, or a little, excuse me, a little loft, and he'd hang out with the Archie Shepp and the jazz guys and everything, and he had all the instruments at his loft. He could play the saxophone and all that, and the guys would go to the club and pay a gig to make some money to pay the rent and everything, but then after the gig was over, they'd fall by and really wail. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's different. The vibe is different than when if you're trying to negotiate how many coconuts do I have to pay you in order for you to play your playing well, then because you're just jamming and communicating within a context that's not based upon the market relationship between human beings. That's an important dialectic.
Yeah, that's critically important. And
because the creative stuff, that's where the creative stuff really happens. If you're interested in the creative and the new stuff is going to be coming out in access before it comes out in the networks. They get sclerosis of the
it's really
arteries.
Simple. What is the purpose of NBC News? It's to sell
Gillette razors, isn't it?
It's not to paraphrase George Gerbner to tell.
Right.
It's to sell.
Okay.
And so you can see what every few minutes there's advertisement and they're pushing different products.
Yeah.
That's their raison d'être. profitability, and that's how they're judged at the end of the day. We're not judged by profitability. I don't think media, given the critical role that it plays in the society, should be judged by profitability.
Okay. New possibilities are being allowed by the zeitgeist. Liberating possibilities for human association that are not based upon negotiating every aspect of everything, a business model, you know.
Yes,
maybe
like
a
social
liberal
networking.
Yes, right.
But even there,
and people are getting together because it feels right and they want to get together, and it's not based upon hierarchical matters of who's in charge and that kind of I don't know if you understand.
Yeah,
it's got implications to a revolutionary new way in which the planet might be organized to make sure everybody gets that oxygen they need is one aspect of it.
Yeah, but even there, the challenge, you know, you always see the battlegrounds, and that's why you see the battlegrounds on public access, because it's like taking the public park and privatizing it and turning it into a high-rise condo. And that's always the battle that we have, and in different forms. Is whether it's really about a housing situation where you want to have public land for public use and for public benefit, or whether you want to take that public land, net neutrality, or you know, an open and free internet system, and privatize it. And so these are the challenges, you know, I think in all aspects. It could be education, could be hospitals or healthcare. In all different aspects of the society, you know, there's those who want to make it scarce and profitable, and those who want to make it open and accessible.
Right, and it may be that we're evolving like history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken, said James Joyce, and that we're getting more and more able to take care of the needs of the human society within an ecological There are new materials coming every day over the transom, new discoveries in every field. We're coming to know something, more capability to provide for it. We have a capability that our inherited systems won't allow us to realize for benefiting the whole of the human society, and that creates a great deal of angst because we're at a time of transition, particularly when the species has weapon systems that apparently Mr. Kaku will tell us can wipe out the whole species, and they're holding on to outdated. So the new ideas are really important. And the technological development of these, because they're coming to carbon 60, it's going to be moving faster beyond Moore's law. It's going to give a lot of capability for communicating new ideas within a non-threatening context, perhaps to the traditional one, that can even get some of the people responsible for that into a place where they can start thinking about something new, a consciousness-raising or educational potential that will come out of public access facilities in a way that won't be able to come out of the traditional business model. So it's doubly important in terms of an educational pattern that may be emerging on a planetary scale.
I think
like a university or something.
Because you see, and I think a lot more people are talking about it than ever before, because of the debacle that exists today in the world, the condition of the planet, and what is happening around the world. How did we get there? Well, one of the ways we got there is we had a media institution, set of media institutions that failed to properly inform and communicate the critical issues of the day. And that has got to change.
We could help
and how does that? Yes, how does that change? Well, it changes by the traditional methodology of public access through free speech and a real diversity of views. Not just the same mantra being dictated all the time because that's what the king wants to hear, or you know, the White House wants to hear. So again, you know, I think that's where, if you want to get out of the mess that humanity is facing today, is partially exactly what you're talking about.
I think so, don't you? And I think it's at a certain critical time in the evolution of consciousness. I mean, this is not just your normal time. This is a time of really important difference. There's something going on that's really important. We have weapons that can destroy the species. Apparently, that could be something that could be really understood and made available. Is that really the truth? I mean, with the, you know, that may be. And then there's a verse side of the understanding the context, the zeitgeist. We may be transcending scarcity as an ontologic reality out of which all of our institutions are built. It's educational content and consciousness raising that could be a characteristic of the media, and people are going to university and things to get careers so they can get a job within a corporation. We need a new economic system. We need new transformative capabilities to allow the liberation of the planet. At the same time we arrive at a point where we can destroy it. We can also see avenues toward liberation in a new kind of within an ecological context that's available to us, which has not been available to our forefathers.
Yeah, and the clock is ticking, by the way.
The clock is ticking, and they're watching. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got and how fast that car is going to the accident. Is also critical, because I think increasingly everybody is becoming more and more aware. Well, we don't have the luxury of time.
Yeah, and the more you're
the situation is deteriorating so quickly, so rapidly.
Well, yes, at the same time, it's still going like Marshall McLuhan used to say, our leaders drive fiercely into the future with their eye fixed firmly on the rear view mirror. They're all ensconced within institutions with the zeitgeist is perhaps going to be subsuming. So there's got to be a place where there can be discussion of these kind of things. It seems to me public access, multimedia, public access, internet-based communication, and a place where people can come where they don't have to be responsible for the institutions, because they have to be responsible to make sure the lights go on. There's a lot of responsibility for the historically. It's like being tied to the old analog thing for communication. You got to keep tabs with the history, but you got to have a system that can allow for an alternative. And I can't think of a better place for that consciousness raising, educational pattern, than what we call public access television. And that's the way we're moving now in terms as we look ahead. It also offers new channel capacity. We should be not talking about channels so much perhaps as megabytes or something, or that. Do you want to address that quickly? Only a couple of minutes left.
Yeah,
but that offers new opportunity for many voices to be heard rather than limited to a scarcity model.
Yes, that's right. So with the digital transformation that has occurred, people in public access now increasingly are talking about megahertz, or capacity, not in the number of channels, but what's your capacity? Because for public access analog channels may in fact translate into 28, 30, 35, 40 digital channels.
Let a million voices go.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. No, that's an important development coming out of the design labs and stuff.
Very important, and so that's a critical issue going forward. Exactly. And so it was interesting when the city council recently voted to support, require the cable companies and the phone companies to support public access and educational and government channels. They said provide support and capacity.
Capacity more than channels.
Didn't mention channels. Capacity, because the issue is, well, what's bandwidth? Megahertz. What is that bandwidth going to be, and what's that set aside for public interest use?
There's a lot of interesting questions. It's a great time to be a live participant and conscious, don't you think?
It is, especially in media.
Particularly in the media like this is really good. Yeah, you could start having things put on hard drives, and you can have servers the size of an Empire State Building or something. And I mean, because there's a capability within that realm of communication that's coming, and it's coming inexorably. And where it's going to come to the best benefit of a place like Manhattan Network, it seems to me. And Dan, thanks. I'm sorry we run out of time. Great pleasure, always pleasure talking with you, and it's great having you at the helm at this time, because there's a lot of opportunity, and thanks for everything, and the staff, everybody here is great and everything, and you're a pleasure to have had his perceptions. We invite you to tune in. We'll be coming back tomorrow. That's it for this particular program. Dan, once again, great talking to you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Happy holiday to you and to you. Happy holiday season upcoming, and we'll see you again tomorrow. So that thing about that's really interesting. The things that are going. That carbon 60 is coming.
What is the carbon?
Carbon 60 is the thing that's going to be the basis of computing. I don't know how far out through. It's the basis of all nanotechnology. It's at a level of design. They're going to have molecular computing.
So the resistance is very little to.
I guess I don't understand it all. It's 60, and it's called Buckminster Fullerene. It's named after Buckminster Fuller because it's geodesic. And it's more effective. They're going to be doing molecular computing when they get past the silicon chip. No silicon chip can be built by a human being. It's all machines. There's a lot of interesting things going on now. But it's going to be moving faster than Moore's Law. And you're on the other side of the chessboard, so every time you double.
I thought they were saying Moore's Law wasn't true anymore because it actually was